Merry Christmas to you all. My name is Ben Friedman, and today I am talking about the newest Zack Snyder film, Rebel Moon, which just opened up on Netflix this past weekend. I got to see this movie, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. But let me just start with my history on Zack Snyder, because I actually think that's a pretty important place to start. Because Zack Snyder has definitely taken some hits within the critics community. Some people dismiss him as a complete hack. Others just are fanatic lovers of Zack Snyder. And I want to go into this review just kind of prefacing this where I stand with Zack Snyder, which is I generally like his style. I've watched a lot, if not all of his films, and I generally go away with them liking aspects of them. Although I will admit, usually the scripts are the weakest parts of the movies, but I would consider myself a fan of the Zack Snyder style. Not a die-hard fan, but I certainly can appreciate what he brings as a visual director. Thus, going into Rebel Moon, which I kind of heard described as Zack Snyder's Star Wars, I was extremely interested in that prospect. I thought that it was source material that could fit Zack Snyder, which was essentially heavy action, heavy stylized action in particular, with very simplistic character tropes and designs. You know, if you're taking the idea of the hero archetype as laid out by Carl Jung that's seen in Star Wars, and you're applying that with a Zack Snyder character, that's actually about as base level as you need him to do. It's just can you hit those beats? And if you can hit those beats with his style of action, I actually thought we could have been in for a really good time. And keyword there is thought, because I saw this movie yesterday and yikes. And I've heard this film described in a number of ways. I obviously alluded to the Star Wars aspect of it earlier. I think it does have Star Wars influence in it. I would actually largely put it more similar in the vein of Denis Villeneuve's Dune films in what it's trying to say about political intrigue, power, and I also believe it has in style a lot more of Seven Samurai Kurosawa in it. My issue with Rebel Moon is Zack Snyder, while he is clearly a fan of these movies that I just referenced, he learned none of the lessons that made those movies good. There's that scene in the beginning of the movie, which I alluded to, where our protagonist is standing looking at what is supposed to be a shot that is very reminiscent of the Tatooine Two Moons first seen in Star Wars. And the issue is we don't know this character. We don't know the turmoil that this character is facing. Take Star Wars. We know what Luke Skywalker is feeling, that wanting for a grand adventure and wanting to leave. This movie, I didn't know anything about our main protagonist, and I felt that way the entire time through. In the case of Dune, which I believe Zack Snyder borrows a lot of the aesthetic from, it has kind of that realism look to it. The costumes are very of this world. They almost resemble like just straight up soldier costumes echoing World War II. But the issue is again, you're trying to make something so realistic, but it actually just comes across as uninspired. I'm watching just a bunch of people in really boring costumes, and there's no life or energy to it. And then with Seven Samurai, and this is, I think, one of the biggest criticisms of this movie, Seven Samurai, Kurosawa paces the film so excellently. And in Rebel Moon, it being a part one and part two, part one really ends with the team being assembled, and part two is where we're going to kind of get the payoff. Thus, this film just staggers its runtime way too long. This movie goes on forever. This is a 2 hour and 20-minute film, and I honestly would have said it was 3.5 hours. This pace is horrendously bad. I was bored out of my mind watching this movie, and Zack Snyder's style is not enough to save this movie. In fact, I would actually call this film styleless. I did not think Zack Snyder put any of his real true style into this movie. I thought all of the action scenes were questionable at best. There are some cool framing shots in this film. There are some scenes of action which just have enough of the just brashness to them that I was impressed by them, but that's far and few between. Going into about an hour and a half of this movie, I just started noticing, I'm like, how many actual like scenes of action direction have we had at this point, which would be fine. You don't need a film to have action every 5 minutes. However, the story of this movie is so uninspired, it's so uninteresting that I just kind of needed the action to kind of just jolt me up and keep me going through. And it's so far and few between that I was just so bored watching this movie, and I couldn't get over that hump of just when we get to actual scenes of fighting, when we actually get to moments of action, the film had lost all momentum that I was completely tapped out with it. And I think this is also largely due to Zack Snyder's style in this movie. And I'm someone who has praised his style before. I think what he brings to Batman versus Superman, what he brings to Justice League, that slow-mo style that we see kind of famously from 300 brought into it, I think it can have really great effects in certain action beats. And in this movie, it's just overindulgent. And Zack Snyder is no stranger to overindulging in slow-mo. That's actually kind of his thing and his niche now. But the issue within this movie is it's used so poorly. It's used in just random moments that are actually laughably bad. There's one very early in the movie. I think it actually might be our first interaction with slow-mo in this movie, and it's just eye-rollingly lazy. It doesn't have any weight to it, and thus you're just, every time it comes on screen, you're just like, you feel this film being dragged out again, where it's just like, come on, let's pick up the pace. And that was my whole thing while watching Rebel Moon. I'm like, can we please get going somewhere? Because none of these characters are interesting. The most interesting character is portrayed by Anthony Hopkins, who voices a robot in this movie. That robot had some emotion, and I was semi-interested in it. Maybe that's just because Anthony Hopkins is such a great actor. But that was the one character that I'm like, we could spend a little bit more time with him, and I'd be more invested. But instead, we're spending time with our main protagonist, played by Sofia Boutella, who, listen, I thought she was great in the first Kingsman movie. She hasn't done much else since then to really impress me. Charlie Hunnam, who is an actor that's just never really worked for me, that's who we're really spending a lot of time with in this movie. And it goes nowhere in such a bad degree that I was just bored. And this movie is a PG-13 film from my understanding, thus it feels like it is holding every punch. And I want to get back to the idea of this film being PG-13 because I also think it's a fundamental issue with Rebel Moon. But yeah, watching this movie, I was just so unimpressed by it, and I was just having an awful time sitting through this movie. And then going into this is going to be my hot take, which I'm really concerned about sharing this hot take. I know Zack Snyder has a very loyal fan base on the internet. Trust me, anyone who reviews movies on the internet who has ever talked about Zack Snyder has at least encountered these fans a few times. So I want to be careful. And again, I want to say right now, very critical, I am a fan of Zack Snyder. I thought his Justice League movie was really good. I liked the Batman versus Superman director's cut. I think the Watchmen director's cut improves the movie. But do you keep hearing the words that I'm saying? The Snyder cut, the extended edition of Batman versus Superman, Watchmen extended director's cut. All of these films are not the completed version of what his vision was. And when you work with a partner like Netflix, you just kind of assume that they're going to give him carte blanche to do whatever he wants to do. His passion project just funded by Netflix. And the issue is that's not what this movie is. And Zack Snyder has already taken to the road basically saying that's not what this is, that he has a director's cut which fundamentally reshapes what this movie is. And here's my hot take, and get ready for this. If you're going to make a movie, just make it right the first time. I don't need a director's cut. Just give me the movie that you actually wanted me to see. It's kind of ridiculous at this point that every movie is now associated with you having a director's cut. And I get it. Sometimes it's okay. Ridley Scott is one of my favorite directors, and he's toyed around with Blade Runner so many times. He has director's cuts of so many of his movies. I understand that that can be something that is rewarding for you. However, when you're working with a studio like Netflix and Netflix is just kind of funding you, I just make the movie you want to make and don't make this crap. I mean, this is so just, everything feels so held back. And maybe this is also the issue of splitting this movie into two parts. Maybe make this movie one and see if there's an audience for it to have a second part in the future. But it's just so self-indulgent. And honestly, this movie would be so much better if it was so more self-focused and it was the movie that you wanted to make, because I truly believe you that you wanted to make this R-rated, grittier version of Star Wars in Rebel Moon. Like, I do believe you. I'm not calling you a liar by any means of the imagination. But when I see this movie, all I can think of is just like, why is it every time that you make a movie, we have a director's cut? Why? What is happening? What is going wrong with it? And I have a theory, and this is me speculating. And so my critical brain is about to turn off, and my conspiracy brain is about to start plugging in. And I think it's at least a fair conspiracy. I think Netflix saw this movie, maybe saw the movie that they were delivered, and were like, maybe this isn't going to be the big hit we wanted to. And Netflix then had to kind of come up with a strategy for it. And they're like, you know what? What if we kind of build into the release the Snyder Cut online fandom that was that 2021 film, with fans of Zack Snyder coming out from all corners of the internet and being like, release the Snyder Cut, release the Snyder Cut. What if Netflix saw that and they're like, we can tap into that too. Let's release this movie. Let's edit it a little bit. Let's make it a PG-13 movie. We'll split it in two, however they decided to do this and market and sell this movie. And then they were like, okay, now that we do this, Zack Snyder will do an interview and he'll do his whole thing of a director's cut, fundamentally reshaping the movie. Thus, when this movie comes out and it's not greatly received, then we can revamp, we can kind of release, you're going to have the fans start demanding a director's cut of this movie, and then all of a sudden, like, there's going to be this whole online movement. This film gets a lot of engagement. Then we release our R-rated cut of this movie, maybe the one that they were always going to release from the get-go. And upon releasing it, then it just gets all the fans just, riled up, like, oh my God, like, this is the movie we wanted to see the whole time, just like it was for Batman versus Superman, or just like it was for Zack Snyder's Justice League. And that is, I think, the strategy. I really believe, from a marketing standpoint, that is what the studio is trying to accomplish. And I don't have any insight on that, but I do believe it might be a fair criticism, because otherwise the criticism is, and I think it's a far less fair criticism to Zack Snyder. The criticism would be, Zack Snyder cannot make a movie right the first time. And that's an extremely unfair. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that this was Netflix's fault for some of the fundamental issues of this movie. Now, I think the big thing that is playing up against them is this movie is such a turkey that I just don't think it's getting that same fan fervor. I haven't seen much online response from this movie being like, oh, this movie's great, or, oh, we want to see the real 4-hour cut, whatever it is, of Rebel Moon. I'm just not seeing that. I think the response to this movie has been so largely mixed negative that I don't even think some of the Snyder fans are coming out to this movie and defending it. And this whole strategy may backfire on them. And, this movie part 2 is coming out in April. And I don't know if this is going to be salvageable. Honestly, this part 1 was so bad that after watching it, I had Rebel Moon part 2 on my schedule for the podcast in 2024. And I was going to reach out, try to get a guest. And after seeing Rebel Moon part 1, I stripped that episode. I cut it. I'm like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to watch part 2. I just have no interest in this. So I'm out on the Rebel Moon universe entirely. I don't think I'll even review Rebel Moon part 2 on this channel unless I just, for some reason, have the inspiration or just see it and actually want to talk about it. But that's my thoughts on Rebel Moon. So this is a really disappointing film from a filmmaker that I quite like. And again, this is not me being out on Zack Snyder. I hope he comes back and he delivers another movie that I like, because like I said, I've been a largely big Zack Snyder defender. I believe he does have a lot of artistic integrity. I just didn't really see it in this movie. And I'm going a really low score here. Out of 5 stars, I am going 0.5 stars out of 5 stars. So half a star for Rebel Moon. With that all said, thank you all for watching me on this Christmas, and do me a Christmas favor. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel for more. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care, and let's do this. Bye-bye.